On September 1st, 1983. Just months away from her 15th birthday, Cursor was a keen horse rider and an animal enthusiast who enjoyed spending her free time with her horse, Commodore, and volunteering at the local veterinary clinic. Between 2:45 and 3 p.m. on the afternoon of September 1st, Cursor collected Commodore from his paddock next to her home on Riverbend Road and rode out to Awatoto Beach. The 14-year-old was last seen alive at some time after 4 p.m. near an old World War II gun emplacement near the mouth of the Tutakuri River, where she was described as having a bloodied face. At this time, she still had Commodore with her. When Cursor failed to return home at 5:30 p.m., her family grew concerned and notified the authorities of her disappearance, though no trace of Cursor was ever located. Not long after she vanished, however, her horse, Commodore, was recovered. Unfortunately, finding Commodore did not give investigators any useful clues. He appeared to be wandering aimlessly near the river bridge. The initial search for Cursor was called off at 11:30 that night and began the following morning again at first light. Subsequent searches were aided by local volunteers, and although the local river and other waterways were explored, no evidence which would lead investigators to the 14-year-old was ever found. On September 6th, a $5,000 reward was offered by the Daily Telegraph for any information leading to Cursor's recovery, but the money went unclaimed. Various psychics and mediums gave their perspective over the years, but have been described by detectives as unhelpful. Investigators initially believed that Cursor may have fallen from her horse after they found parts of a bridle and hoof prints near the World War II gun emplacement and, once witness sightings began rolling in, theorized that something untoward had happened to the teenager afterwards. Perhaps one of the most notable sightings in the case was of a young girl matching Cursor's description near the World War II gun emplacement. The girl was being held at arm's length by a European man who is described as being 5 feet 9 inches and between 45 and 50 years old. The same passerby noted that a white utility vehicle or truck with brown sides was parked nearby. Another witness claimed to have stopped and talked to Cursor at the same spot, and they reported that the 14-year-old had a bloodied face. The young girl explained that she'd gotten injured after falling from her horse. She added that she was waiting on her parents as somebody had already gone to alert them. The last notable sighting came from a witness who stated that at 4:30 p.m., he had driven past a white utility vehicle coming off the bridge. He described the driver as a white man with brown hair, around 20 to 30 years old. He reportedly had his arms around a girl in the passenger seat as he drove with one hand. Meanwhile, Commodore, Cursor's horse, was seen by several witnesses shortly afterwards, tied to the gun emplacement. Over the years, several leads, confessions, and suspects came to light, but none led to Cursor. An orchard worker named John Russell told the police that he had seen the 14-year-old with a bald, middle-aged man near the beach. This man was never located, however, and investigators began to instead suspect that John Russell was trying to throw them off his trail. Russell had a previous conviction for rape and later identified himself as the man who was seen with Cursor at the gun emplacement. Although his home and vehicle were searched, no evidence was found which would indicate the young girl had been present. Police did recover rope from an awning, which Russell had been tasked with getting rid of on behalf of his employers. This same rope had been used to tie Commodore to the gun emplacement. In 1985, 2 years after she'd vanished, Russell took responsibility for Cursor's disappearance and admitted he'd taken her life. However, he recanted shortly afterwards and no charges were ever laid against him. 7 years later, in 1992, Russell took his own life. He'd been staying at a guest house in the city of Hastings following his departure from Lake Alice Hospital, where he'd been getting help at their psychiatric facility. Left no note to explain his actions and did not confess to being involved in Cursor's disappearance. In 2009, an officer in charge of the case stated there was probably more evidence to suggest that Russell was not involved than that he was. In 1999, another man in Melbourne, Australia confessed to the murder, but no evidence could be found to back up his claims. Then in 2012, human bones were discovered in Napier, near Hastings Street. The remains included a skull, but were found to be not Cursor's. Authorities believed that the remains were not linked to a crime due to their old age. In 2018, an officer who'd originally worked the case in the 80s told the New Zealand Herald that he felt the, quote, stupid, bloody, white truck, referring to the utility vehicle, had interfered with the case. He believed it was possible that it might not exist at all, and that it hindered people's memories of what they'd seen on the day of Cursor's disappearance. Cursor Jensen was 14 when she vanished from Napier, New Zealand on September 1, 1983. She was last seen riding her horse, Commodore, on Aotearoa Beach before being witnessed at the nearby gun emplacement. If you have any information about Cursor's case, you can call the Napier Police.